How long ago was that?
53 years ago. I'm Harry Kittner, originally from Weldon, North Carolina. Lived there all my life, except I moved to Chapel Hill about 7 years ago and joined the Kahila. We had a Jewish synagogue there, and it's been in existence about 90 years. First of all, let me introduce my wife, Sarah. Sarah was born and lived in Richmond for her young life and has lived in Weldon for over 50 years. And she was active also in our Temple Emmanuel Synagogue there. We raised 4 children there, and we were the children, and in Weldon we had about 7 Jewish families, and then we had members from Roanoke Rapids and Emporia, Virginia, and Warrington and Enfield and Scotland Neck. And we had a nice, thriving Jewish community there for about almost 90 years.
How many families were members?
Well, I guess at the most we had 25 families, maybe 7, 8 lived in Weldon. The others lived in, like I said, in Emporia, Virginia. We had a good group from Emporia, Virginia, Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, and then in different small towns there were 1 or 2 families. And so we had a nice, thriving congregation for many years. But then as my generation got older, and some of the older original families passed away, and some of us moved away. Our children went off to college, and hardly any of them came back to Weldon. And so it finally got to the point where we only had 2 or 3 families trying to keep it up. And when one of those moved away, the other 2 realized that we just couldn't keep it up.
Did you have a rabbi?
We never had a full-time rabbi. We would get student rabbis from first the conservative seminary and then from the Reform seminary, who would come in not only for the holidays, but we had some of them who came in every other week to teach the children and conduct services. And then because finally all our children were grown and we had no more children, and the number of adults also diminished, and so we finally stopped having that. At one time, we had a circuit riding rabbi that was sponsored by the Jewish I.D. Blumenthal and the North Carolina Association of Jewish Men and Women. and a rabbi would come in a bus that was outfitted as a chapel every other week, and not only teach the children, but have services and adult education classes. So, we observed all the holidays, and we had a nice relationship with the Christian community too. We had, the main Christian churches in town, and there was a just nice camaraderie with the.
Yeah, I might say that when I first came to Weldon as a bride, the first thing people want to know is what church you go to. And of course, all the Jewish people, everyone in the community was active in the synagogue because it was just expected of you. By the same token, I knew where every one of my neighbors went to church and everybody else in town. I knew what denomination they were and what church they went to. And so that was interesting, quite a difference from living in Richmond, where people didn't care what church you went to.
How big a town was Weldon?
Well, I think at the most we might have had 12 to 1,500 people, but the surrounding area, say a radius of 20 miles, we probably had like 30,000 or more people. Roanoke Rapids, which was just 3 miles from Weldon, was larger, and they had maybe 15,000 people. And there were about 5 or 6 Jewish families there, and but the original Jewish community was in Weldon, and that's why the synagogue was built in Weldon, and there were the people in Weldon who really held it together for the infant years. And then as other people moved into Roanoke Rapids and Emporia people started coming to Weldon, we had a real nice sized small town congregation. And we built a building in 1954, and these windows came from the building. When we dismantled the building, we gave the 12 windows, the original 12 windows, to the Beth Shalom home in Virginia Beach, where some of our members were living and interested in it. And we had 4 of the windows replicated, and it was financed by a gift from the Samuel and Rebecca Carden Foundation of Philadelphia. And it so happened my brother Dave was president of the foundation, and because he grew up in Weldon, he had a love for Weldon and the Temple Emmanuel, and he saw to us that we got financing to not only replicate the windows, but also to create the chapel here. And our temple was called Temple Emmanuel, and now the chapel is called Chapel Emmanuel. Well, at the time that I grew up, that was many years ago, there was no one there to teach us. We did not have the student rabbis coming in, and my mother had 2 sisters living in Kingston, New York, and my mother's background and their background was Orthodox, and my dad's background was Orthodox. And we had 4 boys in the family, and at that time girls were not bat mitzvahed, especially in the Orthodox. And so each one of the boys would go to Kingston, New York and live for a year, go to school there, because we stayed with my aunts, and we'd go to Hebrew school, and we were bar mitzvahed in Kingston, New York.
The designs of the windows, who designed the actual windows?
Well, they were made in New Jersey by a stained glass company, and they had pictures of windows, and we selected the ones that we wanted. I said we, actually the main one who was in charge of selecting the windows was Fanny Marks. She lived in Roanoke Rapids. But, it was a community effort, and we got an architect. The original building was just a brick bungalow in the heart of town. And when he came up for sale, we decided that would make a nice synagogue. And we got in touch with an architect. It so happened he was Jewish in Norfolk, Virginia, Charles Levitt. And he came down and redesigned the building. We added on to it. We all made contributed money to finance it. And about 1954, I think we dedicated the temple there.
So were your children bar mitzvahed in this temple?
At the time my children came along, we had this, first we had the circuit riding rabbi project, where they got lessons, and they were taught. And then after that, we started getting a student rabbi to come by, and they were all bar mitzvahed. The girls were not bar mitzvahed at that time, but we did have a confirmation class where the girls were confirmed.
I might add that these same windows that Mr. Levitt designed for incorporated in his design were used in synagogues that he also designed in Norfolk and Virginia Beach. So,
but these were replicated by the Virginia leaded art glass company in Norfolk, Virginia. So they were made in Norfolk.
Were there any objects that were brought from Weldon here to be shared with
many objects. The chairs, the furniture that's in the chapel, and also in the Lubernau library came from Weldon. The menorahs came from Weldon. The lectern came from Weldon. The eternal light came from Weldon. And there, throughout the chapel and also in the library, there are a lot of things that came from Weldon. We have a set of Jewish encyclopedias there that was published in 1906 that belonged to the Scher family, who passed it on to the Josephson family, and the Josephson family passed it on to the temple in Weldon, and from Weldon the books came here.
I might add that we had a diverse group of student rabbis through the years, and I think we might have had one of the first women rabbis.
Hold one
Excuse me,
second,
Darryl.
sorry. I know. You remind-
We had a diverse group of student rabbis through the years. Jan Kaufman was a conservative rabbi, and I believe she was one of the first women rabbis in the country. And she serviced us for a while, and then through the years we had numerous women rabbis.
As well as a few men, male rabbis.
Jackie Mason, the comedian.
He came there for the high holidays before he became well known as his original name was Jack Mesa, and before he came, his brother Gabriel Mesa, who was an ordained rabbi, came for a couple of years, and he recommended his younger brother Jack to come, and everybody said he should have been a comedian rather than a rabbi. And then after that, he went to New York, and somehow or another he became ordained as a rabbi, and he also became a comedian. And we saw him once up at the Borscht Circuit in the Catskills, and because he always alludes to the fact that he was a rabbi in Weldon, North Carolina, and most people don't know where Weldon, North Carolina is.
Now, we also had two beautiful Torahs. We gave one to a synagogue in Virginia Beach, and the other went to a new congregation being formed in Concord, North Carolina.
So are there any Jewish congregations existing now in the eastern part of the state?
There's still one in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and they're struggling because the same thing is about to happen to them that happened to Weldon. The old timers have either moved away or passed away, and the young ones did not come back. And a few new, they do have a few new residents there, but they don't have the roots into the community that we or the original Rocky Mount people have. There's one in New Bern, North Carolina, which was sort of dying out, but they've had an influx of retirees down on the coast, and New Bern is flourishing. They've been rejuvenated there. And then down in, because in Wilmington, they have a nice congregation there.
That synagogue's been there for
Many years, sure. I think there might be still a congregation in Whiteville, North Carolina. And Greenville, North Carolina has a nice growing Jewish population, mainly because of the college and the medical school there. And they're very active, and I think they have a full-time rabbi.
How was it that you kept kosher? How could you do that in Weldon?
Well, many people kept kosher in the early years. Most of the meat was shipped in by bus from either Richmond or Norfolk with dry ice, and a lot of times the meat went bad before it ever got there. At one time we had a shaker, a religious person who killed chickens in the Orthodox manner, and he was from Raleigh, and he would come like once a month or once every 2 weeks, and the people, we kept chickens in our backyard.
That was before my time.
But then we start after the war, most of us went to either Richmond or Norfolk and bought our meat rather than have them shipped in. And we kept kosher for quite a few years.
Yeah.
My parents kept kosher.
One thing I'd like to mention about living as a Jew in a small town, there was the closeness among all the Jews, and the camaraderie between the women was, we would plan holiday parties and Onyx Shabbats, and we'd everything would be homemade, and we'd just have wonderful seders, community seders, and that's something that you don't have in a larger community.
I grew up in Long Island, but it was a small town which did not have many Jews when I was younger. When I got older, people moved out from New York City, but also the same thing, that the Jews that were there were very close, and we would have parties together. Of course, the holidays, I did have a lot of family in New York City, so we would
In fact, we were so close that some of our friends or people in the community would call me Miss Freed,
Miss Faber.
Miss Faber, and I really didn't look anything like them, but they just knew we went to the same church.
Another interesting thing, and this relates to when our children were growing up, our children now, running between 40 and 50 years old, and there were other children there, the Freed children, Faber children, and we made a point for them to be active in like the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, the AZA, because we had to drive to Kinston, Goldsboro, Greenville, Raleigh to take them to meetings maybe once a month. And all our children became active and became friends with children in Greensboro and Raleigh and Charlotte. And
go to these regional
oh yes, and they were, some of them were officers in the district statewide organizations, and they're still friends with many of these people. They still have friends that they keep up with who they got to know back. And now our grandchildren from Raleigh and different places are active in those same organizations. We've moved to Chapel Hill 7 years ago because we have a daughter living here. We have a son in Raleigh, a daughter in Greensboro, and I went to school here in this area, and our children went to school here, and we knew the area, and we felt the time was right for us to start living close to our children as we got up.
One of the first things we did when we moved here was to look around for a synagogue, because the synagogue life was always so much a part of our lives, and we found the Kahila being organized or developing, and we decided to join the Kahila, and it's been a wonderful experience for the most part.
Well, I think it's been a good part. We've made a lot of friends, and we feel very comfortable belonging to the Kahila, and we're very proud of it. And so we were just delighted that they were willing for us to bring things here from Weldon and to make space for a small chapel, which I think will be used probably more so than the large chapel. And we're just very pleased with the people of the Kahila, how receptive they were to the idea of having a chapel dedicated to the history and the legacy of this Temple Emmanuel in the small town, Weldon, North Carolina, that was in existence for approximately 90 years. And now the history will be preserved here. The history is also being preserved at the Beth Shalom home in Norfolk and the Beth Haverim congregation at Virginia Beach. And because with the Torah in Concord, North Carolina, we have another connection. And we're just thrilled that we're going to have about 30 people who have a Weldon, a Temple Emmanuel connection coming this weekend for the dedication.
You're married.
Make out like we're courting each other.
They're courting each other, right? Well, how long ago was that?
53 years ago.
They did this every 53 years.
And where did you meet?
We met, a friend of mine introduced me to Sarah, and his wife was a friend of Sarah's, a college mate. So the two of them, so she's the one that Harry out to date.
Yeah.
And it worked out.